She didn't know that the man ordering the prison release was the Alpha King. She didn't know he could sense her terror through stone walls 3 levels down. And she certainly didn't know that when every other cell opened that morning, hers would remain locked, not as punishment, but as protection. Mira pressed herself against the cold stone wall of her cell, listening to the chaos erupting through the dungeon. Footsteps thundered overhead. Keys jangled. Iron doors groaned open one after another, followed by gasps of disbelief and scattered cheers from prisoners who had given up hope weeks ago. "Royal decree," a guard's voice echoed down the corridor. "All prisoners are to be released by order of His Majesty." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Released, after 3 months rotting in this forgotten corner of the castle dungeons, accused of treason she had never committed. Today she would finally walk free. Lady Vivian's lies had put her here, but the truth would... The footsteps stopped. Mira held her breath as she heard the guard's heavy boots approach her cell, then pause. Through the small barred window she glimpsed his weathered face peering in at her. "What about this one?" another voice asked. "Orders were specific," the first guard muttered, uncertainty creeping into his tone. "This cell stays locked." The words hit her like a physical blow. Stay locked. While every murderer and thief walked free, she, guilty of nothing but catching the eye of a jealous noble lady, would remain here, to die in the dark. "Please," she whispered, though she knew it was useless. "I've done nothing wrong." The guards moved on without another word. Mira sank to her knees on the straw-covered floor, her borrowed prison dress pooling around her like grey water. She had been foolish to hope. Foolish to think justice would find her in this place where innocence meant nothing and noble blood meant everything. That was when she heard them. Different footsteps, slower, more measured, with an authority that made the very stones seem to straighten. The other guards' voices dropped to respectful murmurs that she couldn't quite make out, but she could hear boots approaching her cell with purposeful intent. Something in her chest pulled tight. A shadow fell across the small barred window of her cell door. Then a voice, low and commanding, cut through the dungeon's perpetual chill like warm honey. "Open it." "Your Majesty?" one of the guards stammered. "The prisoner is—" "I said open it." There was no argument after that. Keys rattled against the lock with nervous haste. The heavy door swung inward with a groan that seemed to echo in her bones. And then he stepped into view. Mira's breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing simple dark clothes that somehow looked more regal than any crown. But it was his eyes that stole her ability to think clearly, golden amber that seemed to glow in the dim torchlight, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and protected all at once. Heat shot up her arm without him even touching her, spreading through her chest and settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. Impossible. Everything about this moment felt impossible. "You," he said quietly, and the single word carried more weight than any royal proclamation she'd ever heard. Mira pressed harder against the stone wall, as if she could somehow disappear into it. I don't understand." He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, pine and winter air, and something wild that made her pulse race for reasons she couldn't name. When he crouched down to meet her at eye level, she saw kindness in those devastating golden eyes, patience, and something else that made her chest tight with a longing she had no right to feel. "You're coming with me," he said, and it wasn't a command or a threat. It was a promise wrapped in velvet and steel. "No." The word tumbled out before she could stop it. Terror overrode the strange warmth his presence brought. "Please, I don't know what I've done wrong, but I swear I'm innocent. Don't execute me, please." Something shifted in his expression, a flash of pain that was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Execute you?" He shook his head slowly, golden eyes never leaving hers. "Little one, you're the safest person in this entire kingdom." "I don't understand," she whispered again. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, waiting, not demanding, not forcing, just offering. "You will," he said softly. "You're safe now. I give you my word." And God help her, looking into those impossible eyes, she almost believed him. The golden thread in her chest pulled taut, as if something vital was trying to anchor itself to him. Her hand trembled as she stared at his outstretched palm, knowing that taking it would change everything, knowing that her life, whatever remained of it, would never be the same. Behind him, she could hear the other prisoners celebrating their freedom in the corridors above, but here, in this forgotten cell, time seemed suspended. Just her and this man, with eyes like molten gold and a voice that made promises she desperately wanted to trust. "Who are you?" she breathed. A small smile curved his lips, and she caught a glimpse of something fierce and protective and utterly devoted in his gaze. "I'm the one who's been looking for you," he said simply. And when she placed her trembling hand in his, warmth flooded through her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, chasing away 3 months of cold and fear and despair. His fingers closed around hers, gentle, secure, unbreakable. He helped her to her feet with careful strength, as if she were made of something precious that might shatter if handled roughly. And for the first time since Lady Vivian's accusations had destroyed her world, Mira felt something other than terror. She felt chosen. The carriage was a revelation. Mira had never seen anything like it. Polished black wood inlaid with silver, cushions of deep burgundy velvet that seemed to swallow her small frame whole. After months of straw and stone, the luxury felt almost painful against her skin. Too soft, too clean, too much. He sat across from her, those golden eyes watching her with patient intensity as the wheels rolled over cobblestones toward whatever fate awaited her. She kept her gaze fixed on her hands, folded tight in her lap, afraid that looking at him directly would make her forget how to breathe. "You're shivering," he observed quietly. She was. Despite the warmth of the enclosed carriage, despite the thick cushions, her body couldn't seem to remember what safety felt like. 3 months of cold had settled into her bones. Without a word, he shrugged out of his dark cloak and leaned forward to drape it around her shoulders. The fabric was impossibly soft, carrying his scent of pine and winter air and something wild that made her pulse race. The warmth that had nothing to do with the cloak's material spread through her chest again. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His kindness was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Cruelty she understood. This gentle consideration from someone who could clearly destroy her with a word. This was dangerous territory. "When did you last eat?" he continued, as if reading her thoughts. Yesterday, I think." Time had blurred together in the cell. He reached into a compartment beside his seat and withdrew a small wrapped bundle. Bread, cheese, dried fruit, simple food that tasted like heaven after the prison gruel. She tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but hunger won out over pride. "Take your time," he said softly. "We have a while yet. Where are you taking me?" The question slipped out between bites. "Home," he replied, and something in the way he said it made her chest tight with longing she had no right to feel. When the castle came into view, Mira understood exactly how far out of her depth she truly was. It rose from the mountainside like something from a dream, all soaring spires and graceful arches, with banners snapping in the wind that bore symbols she recognized from stories told around servant quarters. The royal castle, the seat of power for the entire kingdom, and he was bringing her here. The carriage rolled through gates guarded by men who bowed as they passed, through courtyards where nobles in silk and jewels turned to stare, past fountains and gardens that spoke of wealth beyond her comprehension. "I don't belong here," she whispered, pressing back into the velvet cushions. "You belong wherever I say you belong," he replied, and there was such quiet certainty in his voice that she almost believed him. The servants who met them at the main entrance told her everything she needed to know. They bowed to him with the deep reverence reserved for "Your Majesty," the head steward stammered, his eyes flicking to Mira with barely concealed shock. "We weren't— that is, shall I prepare the guest wing?" Mira's world tilted. Your Majesty. She was sitting across from the king, had been eating his food, wearing his cloak, letting him touch her hand. The king, and she was nothing, less than nothing. A servant girl accused of treason, dressed in prison rags, who hadn't seen a proper bath in months. "The blue suite," he told the steward without taking his eyes off Mira's face. "Send for Lady Catherine. Our guest will need proper clothing." Guest, as if she were someone worthy of that title. "Right away, Your Majesty." When they were alone in the grand entrance hall, he stepped closer. She could feel the warmth radiating from him even across the space between them. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said gently. "You're the king," she managed. "I'm many things." He tilted his head, studying her with those devastating golden eyes. "Does that frighten you?" "Yes." The honesty escaped before she could stop it. "Good," he said, surprising her. "Fear keeps you alive, but you don't need to fear me." A woman appeared at the top of the grand staircase, older, elegantly dressed, with kind eyes that reminded Mira of her grandmother, Lady Catherine presumably. "Your bath is ready, dear," she called down. "Come, let's get you settled." As they climbed the marble steps, Mira felt his gaze following her. The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, as if part of her were being left behind with him in the entrance hall. The blue suite was larger than any house she'd ever lived in. The bathroom alone contained a tub big enough to swim in, filled with steaming water that smelled of lavender and roses. Lady Catherine helped her out of the prison dress and into the bath without comment, but Mira caught her sharp intake of breath at the bruises on her arms from rough handling by guards. "How long were you imprisoned?" Lady Catherine asked quietly as she poured warm water over Mira's hair. 3 months. I was falsely accused." "By whom?" "Lady Vivian Ashworth. I worked in her household. She claimed I stole jewellery, but really I just—" Mira stopped, embarrassed. "You just what, dear?" "I caught the attention of someone she wanted for herself." Lady Catherine's hands stilled. "I see. And now you've caught the attention of someone far more important." When Mira emerged from the bath, there was a dress waiting. Deep blue silk that matched her eyes, with silver embroidery that caught the light. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "He must have had this commissioned weeks ago," Lady Catherine murmured, adjusting the sleeves. "Weeks ago. That's impossible. He only just met me today." Lady Catherine met her eyes in the mirror, her expression carefully neutral. "Is it impossible, dear? Or is there something you haven't quite understood yet?" Before Mira could ask what she meant, there was a soft knock at the door. "Are you ready?" His voice through the wood made her pulse race. Lady Catherine smiled. "Answer him, dear. He's been waiting long enough." The dining room was intimate compared to the grand spaces she'd seen. Just a small table set for 2 beside a crackling fireplace. He stood when she entered, and the way his eyes traced over her made heat flood her cheeks. "You look," he began, then stopped, shaking his head. "Beautiful doesn't begin to cover it." She ducked her head, unused to such attention. "The dress is lovely, though I'm sure it was meant for someone else." "It was meant for exactly who's wearing it." He pulled out her chair, his fingers brushing her shoulders as she sat. The contact sent electricity racing down her spine. The meal was simple but perfectly prepared: roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, wine that tasted like liquid sunlight. He asked gentle questions about her life before the imprisonment, listening with genuine interest as she told him about growing up in the village, working various household positions, the small joys she'd found in a life of service. "You speak as if your life has no value," he observed, setting down his wineglass. "Doesn't it?" The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. I'm a servant, was a servant. Now I'm a former prisoner. In the grand scheme of things, I'm nobody. His hand moved across the table to cover hers, and the warmth that flooded through her at the contact made her breath catch. "You're not nobody," he said, and there was something fierce in his voice. "I'm what?" she challenged. "What could I possibly be to you? You're the king of this entire realm, and I'm a girl who mended linens and served tea. We exist in different worlds." "Do we?" He turned her hand palm up, his thumb tracing across her skin. "Then explain this." The golden thread in her chest pulled taut, responding to his touch like a compass, finding true north. The warmth spread through her entire body, making her feel alive in a way she'd never experienced. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered. "You still don't know who I am, do you?" His golden eyes held hers, patient and infinitely gentle. "What I am?" "You're the king." "Yes, but I'm also something else, something that's been searching for years, waiting, hoping." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm Alpha." The word hit her like a physical force. Alpha. She'd heard stories, whispers, legends about the royal line, about the wolves that live beneath human skin, about mates and bonds and destiny. "That's impossible," she breathed. But even as she said it, pieces clicked into place. His unusual strength. The way servants cowered before him with more than just political fear. Those golden eyes that seemed to glow in certain light. "Is it?" He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her palm that made her entire world tilt. "Then explain why every instinct I have is telling me to protect you, why I could sense your fear through stone and steel from 3 floors away, why looking at you feels like I can finally breathe for the first time in my life." Mira stared at him, her mind reeling. "You're saying I'm your—" "Mate," he finished quietly. "You're my mate, the one I've been searching for, the other half of my soul." The golden thread in her chest sang at the word, recognizing truth even when her mind couldn't accept it. "But I'm nobody," she whispered again. He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "You're everything," he said simply, "and I've been waiting my entire life for you." Mira woke to sunlight streaming through windows taller than trees, her body nestled in silk sheets softer than clouds. For one perfect moment she forgot where she was, forgot the impossible conversation from the night before, forgot that the man who claimed she was his mate was sleeping somewhere in this vast castle. Then reality crashed over her like cold water. Mate. The word echoed in her mind, bringing with it a confusion of terror and longing that made her chest tight. She pressed her fingers to the spot where the golden thread seemed to live, feeling it pulse with warmth even now, even with him nowhere in sight. A soft knock interrupted her spiralling thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Lady Catherine with breakfast. Instead, he entered carrying a silver tray himself, dressed in simple clothes that made him look less like a king and more like the man who had knelt beside her chair last night, the man who had called her everything. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. The scent of fresh bread and honey made her stomach clench with need. "You didn't have to. Servants could have." "I wanted to." He met her eyes, and she saw something vulnerable there. "I wanted to take care of you myself." They ate in comfortable quiet, the morning light painting everything golden. She watched him tear bread with hands that could command armies, pour tea with the careful attention of someone who'd never had anyone to serve before. Everything about him contradicted itself, king and servant, predator and protector, commanding and gentle. "Walk with me?" he asked when they'd finished. The castle gardens were a wonderland of colour and fragrance. Roses climbed ancient stone walls, while fountains sang their water music to the morning air. He led her down winding paths away from the main courtyards, away from curious eyes and whispered conversations. Tell me about before, he said, as they settled on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree. Before Lady Vivian, before the accusations. Something in his voice made her want to give him pieces of herself she'd never shared with anyone. I was born in Millhaven, she began slowly. My parents died when I was 7. Fever took them both within a week. I went to live with my aunt, but she had 6 children of her own and barely enough to feed them. She plucked a flower from the tree above, twirling its stem between her fingers. So I found work, kitchen maid first, then housemaid, then lady's maid to whoever would have me. That's surviving, he said quietly. Not living. It was enough. I had a roof, food, safety. I didn't need more than that. Everyone deserves more than just surviving. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw pain in those golden eyes, ancient pain that spoke of understanding. What about you? She asked. What was your before? He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old wounds. Loneliness, he said simply, 28 years of it. Do you know what it's like to rule a kingdom and have no one who sees you as just a man? To be surrounded by people who want things from you but never just want you? The ache in his voice made her chest tight. You've never had anyone. My parents arranged betrothals, political alliances, women who looked at my crown, not my face. He turned to her, and the vulnerability in his expression stole her breath. Every wolf has a mate, Mira, one person in all the world who completes them. I've spent 10 years searching, hoping, praying to find mine, and then yesterday, in a prison cell, I caught your scent and knew. Knew what? That the waiting was over. His hand covered hers on the bench between them. That you were worth every lonely year. The golden thread in her chest pulled toward him so strongly it was almost painful. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in this impossible fairy tale. But I don't know how to be what you need, she whispered. You already are. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, just by existing, just by being you. She was about to respond when voices carried across the garden, multiple voices, growing closer, sharp with urgency and barely contained anger. He tensed beside her, his entire posture shifting from gentle to predatory in an instant. "Your Majesty!" a man's voice called out, tight with disapproval. "Your Majesty, we must speak with you immediately." 3 figures rounded the corner of the garden path, 2 men in rich robes that marked them as council members, and a woman whose beauty was sharp as a blade and twice as cutting, Lady Vivian. Mira's blood turned to ice. The woman who had destroyed her life, who had accused her of theft and treason over a perceived slight, stood here in the royal gardens as if she belonged, as if she had every right to interrupt this moment. "Councillors," he said, rising to his feet. His voice carried a chill that made the very air seem colder. "Lady Vivian, you seem to have lost your way." "We've come about the prisoner," the older councillor said, his gaze flicking to Mira with obvious distaste. "This situation cannot continue." "Situation?" The word came out like a growl. Lady Vivian stepped forward, her smile poisonous sweet. "Your Majesty, surely you can see the scandal this creates. A king consorting with a criminal, a servant girl with no breeding, no proper bloodline." Her voice dripped false concern. "The nobles are already talking. Soon the common people will question your judgment." Mira felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller under their collective stare. Everything they said was true. She was nobody, a servant, a burden that would drag him down. "She belongs in a cell," the younger councillor added, "or better yet, in exile, far from court where she can do no more damage to your Majesty's reputation." "Enough?" The word cracked like a whip, carrying such authority that birds fell silent in the trees. "You forget yourselves." "We think only of the crown," Lady Vivian said, but her eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction as she looked at Mira. "Surely your Majesty understands that some associations are beneath a king." The golden thread in Mira's chest went cold. They were right. Of course they were right. What had she been thinking? That she could somehow belong in this world? That a king could truly want someone like her? She started to stand, to remove herself from this humiliation, when his hand caught her wrist. "Stay," he said quietly, but there was steel beneath the silk of his voice. He turned to face the councillors and Lady Vivian, and Mira felt the change in him like a physical force. This was not the gentleman who had brought her breakfast. This was the Alpha, the king. Power radiated from him in waves that made the very ground seem to vibrate. "You question my judgment," he said, and though his voice was soft, it carried the promise of retribution. "You dare tell me who is worthy of my attention?" "Your Majesty," the older councillor stammered, "we merely suggest." "You suggest nothing." Golden eyes flashed with something that was definitely not human. "You forget what I am, who I am, and most importantly, you forget that my mate is under my protection." Lady Vivian's face went pale. "Your mate, but she's just a—" "Choose your next words very carefully," he warned, and the temperature in the garden seemed to drop 10 degrees, "because they may be your last." Mira had never seen anything more magnificent or terrifying than this man defending her against people who had every right to question her presence. The bond between them sang with his fierce protectiveness, and for the first time she felt what it might be like to truly belong to someone, to be chosen, defended, claimed. "Now," he continued, his voice carrying the absolute authority of both king and predator, "you will apologize to my mate for your disrespect." The silence stretched taut as wire. Then, one by one, they offered stilted apologies that fooled no one. When they were gone, he turned back to her, and the gentleness returned to his face like sun breaking through storm clouds. "Are you all right?" he asked. "You called me your mate," she whispered, "in front of them." "Yes. They'll never accept it, never accept me. Then they'll learn to live with disappointment." He sat beside her again, taking her trembling hands in his steady ones. "Mira, look at me." She did, drowning in those golden eyes. "I don't care about their acceptance. I don't care about bloodlines or politics or what's proper. I care about you. Only you." His voice dropped to a whisper. "The question is, do you care about me?" The golden thread pulled tight, and she realized with startling clarity that she did. Despite the impossibility, despite the fear, despite everything logical screaming at her to run, she cared about this man who looked at her like she was precious. "Yes," she breathed. He leaned closer, and she could see flecks of amber and honey in his eyes. "Then let me kiss you," he whispered against her lips. "Let me show you what it means to be mine." When their mouths met, the world disappeared. There was only heat and want, and the golden thread blazing to life between them like a star being born. She felt his wolf respond to hers, felt something awakening in her blood that she'd never known existed. This was what it meant to be chosen. This was what it meant to belong. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she knew there was no going back. "Stay," he said again, but this time it wasn't a command, it was a plea. And looking into his eyes, feeling the bond between them pulse with life and promise and forever, she knew she would. The great hall had never looked more intimidating. Mira stood hidden behind a stone pillar in the servants' corridor, watching through the narrow doorway as the most powerful nobles in the kingdom assembled for what they called a presentation ceremony. What she knew was really a parade of eligible ladies for the Alpha King to choose from. She shouldn't be here, should be in her room, safe from the political games that could destroy her. But she couldn't stay away, couldn't stop herself from watching as woman after woman was presented to him like offerings to a god. "Lady Rosalind of House Winterbourne," the herald announced. A blonde beauty in silver silk curtsied gracefully before the throne. "Daughter of the Duke, trained in statecraft and diplomacy." From her hiding place, Mira watched his face, saw the polite mask he wore as he nodded acknowledgement. No warmth, no recognition, nothing like the way he looked at her. "Lady Isabel of House Ravencrest," came the next announcement. A redhead with emerald eyes and perfect posture. Granddaughter of kings, educated in 3 languages. Still nothing. His golden eyes remained distant, untouched. Mira pressed closer to the doorway, the golden thread in her chest pulling tight with an ache she couldn't name. This was his duty. She understood that. Kings married for alliances, not love. Not impossible bonds with servant girls who... And finally, the herald's voice rang out with particular emphasis. Lady Vivian Ashworth, recently returned from the northern courts where she distinguished herself in negotiations with our allies. Mira's blood turned to ice. Vivienne glided forward in deep purple silk that matched her calculating eyes. She moved with predatory grace, her smile sharp as she approached the throne. When she curtsied, it was deeper than the others, more intimate somehow. "Your Majesty," Vivienne purred, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "I trust you remember our previous conversations about suitable matches." Something shifted in the room, a tension that made Mira's skin crawl. She could see it in the way the other nobles leaned forward slightly, in the way the councillors exchanged meaningful glances. "Lady Vivian," he said, and his voice was carefully neutral. "I know we discussed my unfortunate experience with that servant girl," Vivian continued, loud enough for everyone to hear, "the one who tried to bewitch you with whatever dark arts she learned in the gutters." Mira's heart stopped beating. "But I'm sure you've come to your senses by now," Vivian went on, her smile turning poisonous. "Surely you realise that a king cannot be seen consorting with criminals, with thieves and liars who use unnatural means to—" "Enough!" The word cracked through the hall like thunder. Every noble froze. Even Vivian took an involuntary step back, but she recovered quickly, that snake-like smile returning. "Of course, Your Majesty, I simply mean to help you avoid an embarrassing mistake. After all, when I had that girl arrested, I found certain items in her possession." She gestured to a servant who brought forward a small wooden box. From within, Vivian withdrew what looked like herbs, crystals, and a small carved figure that made several nobles gasp. "Dark magic," Vivian announced triumphantly. "Found hidden in her belongings. Clearly she was using witchcraft to seduce our king." The accusation hit Mira like a physical blow. She knew those items. They weren't hers. But she also knew how convincing planted evidence could look to people who wanted to believe the worst. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, suspicious glances, whispered conversations about improper influences and unnatural attractions. "You see?" Vivian pressed her advantage. "This is exactly why bloodline matters, why proper breeding is essential. A king must choose wisely, not be led astray by common-born seductresses with questionable loyalties." Mira felt herself shrinking back into the shadows. Every word was a knife twist of truth. She was common-born. She had no proper bloodline. She was nothing, and everyone in this room knew it. She turned to flee back to her room, to hide from this public humiliation, when a hand caught her wrist. "Where are you going?" Lady Catherine whispered, appearing beside her in the corridor. "I can't watch this," Mira breathed. "She's right. They're all right. I don't belong here." "Don't you?" Lady Catherine's eyes were sharp. "Look at him, child. Really look." Against her better judgment, Mira turned back to the doorway. He sat perfectly still on the throne, but even from a distance she could see the rage building in him, could see the way his hands gripped the armrests, the way his jaw was set. Most telling of all, she could feel his fury through the bond, hot and protective and absolutely deadly. "He hasn't said a word," one noble whispered to another. "Perhaps he's considering Lady Vivian's proposal." "She would make an excellent queen," another agreed. "Proper breeding, no embarrassing connections." That was when Vivian made her fatal mistake. "Bring the girl here," she called out, her voice ringing with false authority. "Let the court see what manner of creature dared to bewitch their king. Let them witness her shame." Guards moved toward the servants' entrance, toward where Mira was hiding. The golden thread in her chest blazed with sudden heat. Not her heat, his. Through the bond, she felt the exact moment his control shattered. The sound that erupted from the throne wasn't human. It was a roar that shook the very stones of the castle, that sent birds fleeing from the rafters and made every person in the great hall fall to their knees in instinctive submission. The sound of an alpha whose mate had been threatened. When it faded, the silence was deafening. He rose from the throne with fluid grace, but there was nothing human in the movement. Power radiated from him in waves that made the air itself seem to bow. His eyes blazed gold, and Mira could swear she saw the shadow of his wolf looking out from them. "You," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority, "dare to threaten what is mine." Lady Vivian had gone white as bone. "Your Majesty, I only meant to—" "You meant to manipulate, to lie, to destroy an innocent woman because your pride couldn't accept that she was everything you could never be." He descended the throne steps slowly, deliberately. "Did you think I wouldn't know? Did you think I couldn't scent your deception?" "I don't know what you mean," Vivian stammered. "The evidence you planted, the lies you spread, the 3 months you let an innocent woman rot in a cell because you were jealous." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the hall. "Did you really think you could fool me?" The wooden box in Vivian's hands began to shake. She seduced you, used magic to—" "The only magic she possesses," he said, and his voice was soft now, gentle, "is the magic of being exactly who she is, pure, kind, brave, everything you are not." He turned to address the entire hall, and when he spoke, his words rang with the power of both king and predator. "Let me make something clear to all of you. The woman you dare to malign is my mate, my chosen, my equal in all things." His eyes swept across the assembled nobles, and Mira watched them shrink back from that golden gaze. "She will be your queen, and any who cannot accept that will find themselves seeking new homes in distant lands." Gasps echoed through the hall. Vivian swayed on her feet. "But she's nobody," someone whispered from the crowd. His head turned toward the voice with predatory precision. "She is everything." And then, to Mira's absolute shock, he looked directly at the servants' entrance where she was hiding. "Come here," he said softly, but his voice carried clearly to her. "Come to me." Every instinct screamed at her to run. Every logical thought told her this would only make things worse. But the bond between them pulled taut, and she found herself stepping into the great hall. The walk to the throne felt like an eternity. Every eye was on her, every whisper was about her, every judgment was against her. She wore a simple blue dress, beautiful, but nothing compared to the silks and jewels of the ladies who had been presented. When she reached him, he stepped down to meet her, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "There you are," he murmured, and she could see love shining in his golden eyes. "My brave, beautiful mate." And then, in front of the entire court, in front of Lady Vivian and the councillors and every noble in the kingdom, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it was claiming, possessive, a public declaration that she belonged to him and he to her, that nothing in heaven or earth could change that truth. When they broke apart, she was breathing hard, and the bond between them was blazing like a star. "Behold your queen," he announced to the hall, his arm around her waist. "Behold my mate, and know that any who threaten her threaten me." The silence stretched for heartbeats. Then, slowly, one by one, the nobles began to kneel, all except Lady Vivian, who stood frozen with rage and disbelief. "You will leave my kingdom," he told her conversationally, "tonight, and if you ever speak her name again, I will consider it an act of war." Guards moved forward to escort Vivian away, but not before Mira saw the pure hatred in her eyes. When they were gone, When the hall was empty except for the two of them and the echoes of what had just happened, he turned to her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Mira looked up at the man who had just declared her his queen in front of his entire court, who had defended her against enemies and proclaimed her worth to the world. "I'm perfect," she whispered, and for the first time in her life she actually believed it. The sacred grove lay 3 hours' ride from the castle, hidden deep in ancient woods where moonlight filtered through leaves older than kingdoms. Mira had never seen anything so beautiful or terrifying in her life. Massive oak trees formed a perfect circle around a clearing carpeted with silver moss that seemed to glow in the darkness. At the centre stood a stone altar, carved with symbols that made her blood hum with recognition she couldn't explain. This was a place of power, of magic that ran deeper than human understanding. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, his hand warm and steady in hers. She looked at him in the moonlight, her alpha, her king, her impossible love, and felt the golden thread in her chest pulse with certainty. "Yes," she whispered. The pack had already assembled in the grove, dozens of wolves in human form, standing silent witness to what was about to unfold. She recognised some faces from court, others were strangers, but all watched her with the same expression of reverence and acceptance. Lady Catherine stepped forward, carrying a wooden bowl filled with what looked like liquid starlight. "The ceremonial wine," she explained gently, "made from flowers that bloom only under the full moon." An elderly man with silver hair and eyes like winter storms approached from the shadows. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "I am Elder Marcus," he said, bowing slightly to both of them. "It is my honour to perform the binding ceremony." Binding. The word sent shivers of anticipation and terror down her spine. "Before we begin," Elder Marcus continued, "you must understand what you are choosing. The mate bond is not merely marriage. It is the joining of souls, the sharing of life force itself. Once complete, you will feel each other's emotions, share each other's strength, and your lives will be forever intertwined." "What if I'm not strong enough?" Mira asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Then I will be strong for both of us," he answered immediately, his golden eyes fierce with devotion. "Always." Elder Marcus smiled. "The Luna's doubt is natural, but the bond would not be possible if she were not worthy. The moon herself has blessed this union." As if in response to his words, the full moon emerged from behind a cloud, bathing the grove in silver light so bright it seemed almost solid. The symbols on the altar began to glow, and Mira felt something ancient and powerful stirring in her blood. "Let us begin," Elder Marcus intoned. He led them to the altar, gesturing for them to face each other with hands joined. The pack formed a circle around them, their combined presence creating an energy that made the very air vibrate with anticipation. "State your intentions," Elder Marcus commanded. He looked into her eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute truth. "I claim Mira as my mate, my equal, my other half. I offer her my protection, my devotion, and my life. I bind myself to her in this world and whatever comes after." The golden thread in her chest blazed to life, responding to his words like a flame meeting kindling. "And you, Luna?" Elder Marcus prompted. Mira's voice trembled, but her words were clear. "I accept the bond. I choose him as my mate, my alpha, my heart. I offer him my trust, my love, and my life. I bind myself to him willingly and completely." The moment the words left her lips, the world shifted. Power rushed through her like liquid fire, connecting her to him in ways she'd never imagined possible. She could feel his wolf, wild and protective and utterly devoted to her, could sense his emotions as clearly as her own. Wonder, love, fierce joy, and a possessiveness that should have frightened her, but instead made her feel cherished. "Drink," Elder Marcus said, offering them the ceremonial wine. They shared the cup, the liquid tasting of moonlight and starflowers, and something that made magic sing in her veins. With each sip, the bond grew stronger, deeper, more permanent. "Now comes the marking," Elder Marcus announced. She knew what this meant, had learned about it during the preparation rituals, the physical claiming that would seal their bond and mark her as his Luna for all to see. He stepped closer, his hands gentle as they tilted her head to expose the curve of her neck. "This will hurt for a moment," he whispered against her ear. "Then it will be perfect, I promise." She felt the change in him as his wolf rose to the surface, felt his canine teeth lengthen just before they pierced the sensitive skin where her neck met her shoulder. Pain flared bright and sharp, but it lasted only seconds before transforming into something else entirely. Pleasure and completion, and a sense of belonging so profound it made her cry out. Through the bond, she felt his wolf claiming hers, marking her as mate and Luna and forever his. When he lifted his head, she could see her own blood on his lips, but there was nothing frightening about it. It was beautiful, sacred, the seal of their unbreakable connection. "My turn," she whispered, understanding instinctively what was needed. She bit down on the spot where his neck met his shoulder, tasting copper and salt and something wild that made her own wolf stir to life. She had never felt her wolf before, had never even known she had one, but now it rose to meet his, completing the circle of their bond. The pack around them began to howl, their voices rising in harmony to celebrate the successful claiming. The sound echoed through the ancient grove, carrying their joy to the moon herself. When the marking was complete, they stood forehead to forehead, breathing hard, the bond between them blazing like a star. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Complete," she whispered. "For the first time in my life, complete." Elder Marcus stepped forward with a silver circlet adorned with moonstone. "The Luna's crown," he announced, placing it gently on her head, "symbol of your authority and your bond." The pack knelt as one, acknowledging their new Luna. But more than that, she could feel their acceptance, their welcome through the pack bond that now connected her to all of them. "Rise," she said, testing her new voice of authority. "Rise and celebrate with us." What followed was like nothing she had ever experienced. The pack celebrated with dancing and singing that seemed to make the very trees join in. Wine flowed, food appeared as if by magic, and she found herself laughing and dancing under the moonlight with people who had become her family. But the most beautiful moment came when he pulled her aside, away from the celebration, to a quiet spot beneath the largest oak tree. "How does it feel to be Luna Queen?" he asked, settling her between his legs as he leaned back against the massive trunk. "Terrifying," she admitted. "Wonderful, impossible." "You'll be magnificent," he said with absolute certainty. "You already are." Through the bond, she could feel his emotions as clearly as her own. Love, pride, wonder, and a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "I can feel your wolf," she marvelled, pressing her hand to his chest. "And I can feel yours." His arms tightened around her. "She's been waiting for me as long as I've been waiting for you." "What happens now?" "Now we go home," he said simply. "We build a life together. We rule together. We love each other until the stars burn out. And after that? After that, we love each other still." As the moon reached its zenith and the celebration continued around them, Mira closed her eyes and let herself feel the full wonder of what had just happened. She was no longer alone, would never be alone again. She had found her place, her purpose, her other half. She had found home. The bond hummed between them, golden and unbreakable, carrying with it the promise of forever. And for the first time since she was 7 years old and lost everything, Mira believed in happy endings. 3 months had changed everything. Mira stood at the balcony overlooking the castle courtyard, watching the morning bustle of a kingdom transformed. Where once there had been whispered complaints and sullen obedience, now there was laughter, purpose, hope. Warm arms circled her waist from behind, and she leaned back against his solid chest with a contentment that still amazed her. "Good morning, my queen," he murmured against her ear, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, my king." She tilted her head to accept his gentle kiss to the mark he'd left on her neck, the mark that still tingled with their bond 3 months later. "Sleep well? With you in my arms, always?" His hands splayed across her stomach, and she felt his smile against her skin when he encountered the small but unmistakable curve there. "How are you feeling today?" "Perfect." And she meant it. The morning sickness had passed, leaving behind only a warm glow of anticipation. Strong. Through their bond, she felt his surge of protective love mixed with wonder. Their child, the heir they'd both hoped for but hadn't dared expect so soon, was thriving, growing, a tiny life that already felt precious beyond measure. "The council meeting isn't until this afternoon," he said, his voice taking on a hopeful note. "We could have breakfast in bed, again." She laughed, turning in his arms. "Your Majesty, people will talk." "Let them. I'm utterly besotted with my wife and completely unashamed of it." Wife. The word still sent warmth flooding through her. The official royal wedding had taken place 6 weeks after the mating ceremony, a grand affair that had celebrated not just their union, but the new era of justice and equality they were building together. "Actually," she said, "I wanted to visit the new legal centre this morning, see how the reforms are working." Pride and love blazed through their bond. The legal reforms had been her idea. Courts where common people could seek justice without fear, where accusations required actual evidence, where birth didn't determine worth. It was working better than they'd dared hope. "Then we visit together," he said simply. "Where you go, I go." An hour later, they walked hand in hand through the lower quarter of the capital, flanked by guards who were smiling rather than grim. The people they passed bowed, but also waved, called out greetings, offered congratulations on the coming heir. "Your Majesty!" A woman rushed forward, her face glowing with gratitude. "Please, I must thank you. The new courts, they helped my family get our land back when Lord Garrett tried to steal it with false documents." Mira squeezed the woman's hands. "Justice delayed is not justice denied," she said gently. "I'm so glad we could help." As they continued through the streets, she saw the changes everywhere. Children who were cleaner, better fed, shops thriving under the new trade policies, people walking with their heads high instead of hunched in fear. "Do you remember what you told me that first night?" he asked quietly as they approached the new courthouse. "That you were nobody?" "I was wrong," she said without hesitation. "I was just becoming somebody." The courthouse was bustling with activity, lawyers helping common people draft proper legal documents, judges hearing cases without regard to social status, clerks ensuring every citizen could access the system that had once been reserved for the wealthy. "Your Majesties," Judge Harrison approached with a broad smile. "Perfect timing. We just finished a case I thought you'd want to hear about." "Oh?" Mira raised an eyebrow. "Sir, a servant girl accused of theft by her noble employer, but thanks to the new evidence requirements, we discovered the employer had been stealing from his own family and trying to frame the girl." Judge Harrison's eyes twinkled. "The girl goes free with compensation, and the Lord faces justice for his crimes." Through their bond, she felt his fierce satisfaction. "Justice served," he said quietly, "as it should be." They spent the morning touring the facility, speaking with people who had found justice where once there would have been only oppression. Each story was a victory, each grateful face a reminder of why their love had mattered beyond themselves. When they returned to the castle for lunch, they found Lady Catherine waiting with a letter that made them both freeze. "It's from the northern border," Lady Catherine said carefully. About Lady Vivian. He took the letter, his jaw tightening as he read. Through their bond, Mira felt his anger tempered by grim satisfaction. "What is it?" she asked. She tried to convince the northern lords to support her claim that our marriage was invalid, he said, setting the letter aside. They laughed her out of court and sent her further north with warnings not to return. "Good," Mira said firmly. She made her choices. "And we made ours." He pulled her close, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly. Better choices. That evening they held their weekly dinner with the pack, a tradition that had grown from the small family gatherings after their mating. The great hall filled with laughter as pack members shared stories of the week, celebrated new matings, welcomed new pups. "A toast," called out Marcus, the elder who had performed their ceremony, "to our Alpha and Luna, who have brought not just justice to the kingdom, but joy to the pack." The toast was echoed by dozens of voices, and Mira felt the pack bonds humming with contentment and love. Later, in the quiet of their private chambers, she and her king sat before the fireplace, her head in his lap as he gently stroked her hair. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The life you had before, when you didn't have to worry about someone like me disrupting your carefully ordered world?" "Disrupting?" He laughed softly. "My love, you didn't disrupt my world. You completed it. Everything before you was just waiting. Even the loneliness. Especially the loneliness. It led me to you." She turned to look up at him, this man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "What do you think our child will be like?" "Fierce like their mother," he said immediately. "Kind like their mother. Brave like their mother." "And stubborn like their father," she added with a smile. "And loyal like their father. Protective like their father." His hand moved to rest on her belly again. "Perfect like both of us together." Through their bond she felt his vision of their future. Children with golden eyes and fierce hearts. A kingdom built on justice and love, growing old together with their hands still intertwined. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more," he replied, the old argument that had become their favourite game. "Impossible," she said, settling more comfortably against him. "Want to bet?" She tilted her head to meet his kiss, tasting love and promise and forever on his lips. Through the bond that connected them, through the child growing beneath her heart, through the kingdom they were building together, she felt the absolute truth of what they'd found. This was what it meant to be chosen. This was what it meant to choose love over fear, trust over safety, hope over despair. This was what it meant to be everything to someone who was everything to her. As the fire crackled and the castle settled into peaceful quiet around them, Mira closed her eyes and let herself rest in the certainty of their love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve their people, new joys to discover. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man who had found her in a prison cell and made her a queen, not through magic or force, but through the simple revolutionary act of seeing her worth. The golden thread that connected them pulsed with contentment, carrying promises of all the tomorrows yet to come. And Mira knew, with the absolute certainty of a woman who had found her home, that every single one of those tomorrows would be beautiful. After all, she was no longer nobody. She was everything, and she was exactly where she belonged.